I remember when we were kids, my sister and I did everything together. We used to sleep in the same bed when it stormed outside, shared secrets under the blanket with a flashlight, and even pretended our tiny room was a castle. She was my first best friend, my partner in every little mischief, and honestly the one person I thought I'd grow old with side by side. We laughed a lot back then. Real laughter, the kind that echoed through the house and made our parents tell us to quiet down. As we got older, life took us in different directions, but the bond felt the same, or at least I thought it did. I was the first one to finish college, got a decent job, and helped my parents financially. I even helped her with her college applications. But then I lost my job. It wasn't anyone's fault. The company downsized and I was one of the many who had to go. It shook me to the core. I had savings, but my confidence? That was gone. I felt embarrassed, ashamed, like I had failed everyone, especially myself. At that same time she met someone. He was well-dressed, polite, from a wealthier family, and he treated her like a queen. Within a year they were married. I was happy for her, at least I tried to be. But the shift was immediate. She started dressing differently, talking differently. Suddenly, it felt like I didn't belong in her new world. She started making little comments. "Maybe you should try harder," she once said when I mentioned I hadn't found a new job yet. Or, "It must be hard not being able to travel," when I told her I was skipping a trip to save money. I would brush it off, laugh even, thinking maybe she didn't realize how it sounded. But deep down it stung. The girl who once cried with me over heartbreaks and cheered for me louder than anyone was now looking at me like I was less. Like I was a reminder of what she used to be, and she didn't want that around anymore. Then came the argument. It was over something small, so small I barely remember the details. I think I forgot to return a dish after a dinner. She called me careless, I called her dramatic, and suddenly we weren't speaking. I apologized first like I always did. But this time she didn't respond. Weeks turned into months. She stopped inviting me to family dinners. If I showed up, she'd barely make eye contact. She planned get-togethers, and somehow I was the only one who never got the message. Our parents didn't say much. They always tiptoed around family issues. But I saw the shift. My name was slowly erased from the guest list. The worst part, he never explained why. It wasn't the argument. That was just the excuse. The truth? I think she didn't want me around anymore because I reminded her of where she came from, because I didn't fit the polished image she now wanted to project. And maybe in her eyes, success had become a measure of worth. So I stayed quiet. I pulled away too. Not because I didn't care, but because the door was already closed from her side. I missed her every day, but I told myself I had to accept it. You can't force someone to make space for you in their life when they've already decided you don't belong. The day my sister gave birth to her son, I was right there in the hospital waiting room, pacing the floor like it was my own child coming into the world. When the nurse finally walked out and said, "You can go in now," I remember how my hands trembled. I walked into that room and saw the tiniest little baby wrapped in a blue blanket, sleeping in her arms. She looked exhausted but so proud. And then she smiled and said, "You want to hold him?" I nodded, even though my eyes were already filling with tears. The moment I held him, it was like my heart expanded in a way I didn't know it could. He grabbed my finger with his little hand and I whispered, "I'm always going to be here for you, okay?" And I meant every single word. From that day on, I treated him like he was part of my own soul. I was the one who showed up for every birthday, every school performance, every scraped knee. When he got his first fever and my sister panicked, I stayed up all night with them, holding cold cloths to his forehead while she cried on the edge of the bed. When she had long work shifts and couldn't find a sitter, she'd call me. "Can you watch him for a few hours?" I never said no. Not once. I bought him little toys just because, took him to the zoo, taught him how to color inside the lines. I celebrated his first words, his first steps, his first lost tooth. I still remember the way he'd run up to me, arms wide open, shouting my name like it was the best sound he'd ever known. For a long time I truly believed I had a special place in his heart, maybe even one no one else could fill. But everything changed one quiet afternoon. I was sitting on my couch holding a neatly wrapped gift. A little Lego set he'd been talking about for weeks. I had picked it up on sale and even wrote a small note to go with it. "From your biggest fan." I was just about to head out and surprise him when my phone buzzed. It was a message from my sister. Just one short line: "Please don't come to his birthday. We're keeping it family only." I stared at the screen for a long time, thinking maybe I misread it. Maybe it was a joke. But no. It was real. Cold. Final. No explanation. No apology. Just a door being slammed in my face. I sat there for hours, the gift still on my lap, unopened. I didn't text back. I didn't ask why. I knew if I tried she'd just make it sound like it was no big deal, like I was being dramatic again. So I said nothing. I swallowed the pain like I had learned to over the years. It tasted bitter this time. That night I placed the gift on the shelf in my closet. I didn't have the heart to return it. I couldn't even bring myself to wrap it for someone else. It belonged to him. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was quiet but heavy. A kind of heaviness that sits in your chest like a stone. I didn't just miss the party, I missed him. And the hardest part? Knowing he probably didn't even understand why I wasn't there. After everything with my sister, I went quiet, not just with her but with the world. Losing my job had shaken me to the core. There were days when I couldn't even get out of bed, days when I questioned everything I'd worked for. I remember standing in line at the unemployment office, staring at the floor so no one would see the tears in my eyes. It felt like I had failed at life, like I was watching everyone else move forward while I stayed stuck. But something inside me refused to give up completely. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was survival. I started picking up night shifts, whatever I could find. I worked at a warehouse, sorting packages until my hands were raw. Then I'd go home, sleep a few hours, and spend the rest of the day studying business online. Free YouTube videos, cheap courses, late-night webinars. I consumed everything I could. I told myself that if no one believed in me anymore, I'd become the kind of person who didn't need anyone's belief to succeed. Years went by like that. It wasn't glamorous. I had dark circles under my eyes, a fridge that was more empty than full, and a calendar full of goals that sometimes felt impossible. But slowly, painfully slowly, things began to shift. I took on small clients, mostly local businesses who couldn't afford big agencies. I helped them with branding, strategy, basic marketing. Word spread. One client led to another and then another. Before I knew it, I had enough work to hire someone part-time to help me. Then I rented a small office space. Nothing fancy, just enough to look professional. That's when I knew this wasn't just a hustle anymore. This was a business. My business. Today my consulting firm serves clients from 3 countries. We help mid-sized companies restructure, launch products, and grow. I have a team of 9 full-time employees and a few freelancers who jump in when things get busy. We're not a giant corporation, but we're stable. We're respected. And most importantly, I built it all myself. From nothing. You'd think I would have shouted my success from the rooftops, but I didn't. I stayed quiet. Not because I wasn't proud, but because I had learned the value of privacy. After what happened with my sister, I didn't want to invite judgment, envy, or fake congratulations. Even my parents didn't know the full extent of what I had built. They just assumed I had found some work, and I let them think that. It was easier than explaining everything. Then 1 week before my nephew's birthday, the party I hadn't been invited to, I got an email from my HR department. New senior marketing manager starting Monday, Mr. Jason Hart. My heart stopped for a second. That name. My sister's husband. I double-checked the resume and application form. There was no mistake. Jason had applied through a recruitment agency we worked with. I wasn't involved in the hiring process at that level anymore, so he had no idea where he had landed. And apparently he hadn't recognized the company name either, probably assuming it was just another firm in a city full of offices. I sat there for a long time staring at his picture on the internal profile. The same man who once looked at me like I was nothing, like I was the embarrassing, unemployed sister-in-law who didn't belong. The same man who smiled politely at me during family dinners but always managed to avoid any real conversation. Now he was my employee. And he had no idea. For a moment I felt a strange mix of emotions. Amusement. Maybe even a little justice. I wasn't the same woman who got left out of a child's birthday. I wasn't the same woman who had once cried in silence while holding a gift she never got to give. I had changed. I had grown. And they didn't even see it coming. I didn't call my sister. I didn't mention it to anyone. I just watched the pieces fall into place quietly, like life was writing its own script. One where I didn't have to beg to be seen anymore. Because now, whether they knew it or not, I was in the position of power. I hadn't planned on going to the party. After everything, I told myself I'd just leave the gift at the front door, maybe with a small note, and drive away. It wasn't about pride, It was about peace. But that morning I woke up with a strange feeling in my chest. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a quiet nudge, like a whisper saying, "Go. Just go." So I did. I took my time getting ready, nothing over the top. Just a simple soft blue dress and a pair of flats. My hair tied back neatly. No designer labels, no heavy makeup. Just me, the way I felt most comfortable. I picked up the wrapped gift from my shelf, the same one I had held onto after her message, and tucked it under my arm. Then I drove to the venue. It was a local community hall, nothing fancy. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, quietly preparing myself for whatever reaction might come. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to be dramatic. I just wanted to see him, even if it was just for a second, and hand him the gift I had picked out with so much love. As I stepped through the entrance, the sound of chatter and music hit me first. Kids running around with balloons, adults sipping punch, laughter echoing from the far corner. I paused for a moment, took a breath, and stepped inside. That's when it happened. Heads began to turn, slowly at first. A few people glanced my way, then whispered something to the person next to them. I smiled gently and kept walking, unsure why the attention was so intense. Maybe they weren't used to seeing me dressed like this. Or maybe they just didn't expect me to show up at all. Then I saw her, my sister, standing near the cake table holding a small paper plate. Her eyes met mine across the room and I watched her entire face freeze. She put the plate down without looking, almost mechanically, and started walking toward me. She didn't smile. She didn't say hello. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. I looked at her, calm and steady. Before I could even open my mouth, a voice called out from behind her. "Excuse me." Jason, her husband, was walking toward us from across the room. He looked completely relaxed, like any man enjoying a party, until he saw me clearly. He stopped. The expression on his face changed in an instant. Confusion. Recognition. Realization. And then, something like embarrassment. He cleared his throat lightly and adjusted his collar. Then he said it, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Good evening, boss." The entire room fell silent. I watched the color drain from my sister's face. Her mouth opened slightly as if to say something, but nothing came out. A few people nearby turned to each other, clearly confused. Someone muttered, "Wait, what did he just say?" Jason, trying to save face, forced a polite smile and looked between us. "I didn't know you two were related." I gave a small, polite nod and said, "Well, now you do." And with that I handed him the gift. "It's for your son. I hope he still remembers me." Jason took the gift slowly, almost like it weighed more than it should have. I turned back to my sister, whose expression was now a mix of shock, confusion, and something else. Something like fear. But I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. I just smiled, gave one last glance at the boy playing near the corner, and quietly walked out. Let them talk. Let them wonder. Let her piece together the truth. Because in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt seen. And I didn't have to say a word. Jason looked like he had been slapped. He blinked twice, like his brain was still catching up to his mouth. "You own the company?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "But I just had orientation 2 days ago. I saw your picture on the boardroom wall. Your name is on everything." You could have heard a pin drop in that room. All the little birthday conversations fell quiet as people began to tune in. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. My silence said more than words ever could. I watched my sister out of the corner of my eye, her face drained of color. Her lips parted slightly, but she couldn't speak. Someone from the snack table, maybe one of her in-laws, looked over with raised eyebrows. "You didn't tell us she was your sister?" Another voice chimed in. "Wait, that's the boss?" "Jason's boss." The whisper started. Soft, curious at first, then sharper. Judging. Wondering. Comparing. My sister, who had spent so long crafting an image of superiority, of being the one who married well, who did better, stood frozen in the middle of her carefully arranged fantasy as it cracked around her. I kept my posture relaxed. Calm. I wasn't there to embarrass her. I hadn't planned this. But I wasn't going to shrink myself anymore either. Jason looked back and forth between us. It was like watching someone reevaluate their whole reality in real time. I saw it in his eyes. The moment he realized that the woman his wife had mocked, excluded, and talked down about, was now the one signing his paychecks. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked me genuinely. I smiled softly. You never asked. My sister tried to step in then, forcing a small, shaky laugh. Oh please, it's not that big a deal, she said, waving a hand. She started that business just recently. It's nothing major. Jason's face told another story. He shook his head. No. That company has offices in 3 countries. The client list alone. Jason, she snapped, her voice a bit louder now. Can we not do this here? She tried to recover, but the damage was done. The people around her had already shifted. Her in-laws weren't smiling anymore. They were watching her carefully, eyes narrowed just slightly. Friends who usually hovered near her now kept a little distance, their curiosity getting the better of their loyalty. I didn't stay to watch her spiral. Instead, I walked a few steps toward the kids' table, where her son was sitting with a small group of friends. He looked up and his face lit up when he saw me. Auntie. That word, so pure, so innocent, melted something in my chest. I kneeled beside him, handed him the wrapped gift and said, "Happy birthday, sweetheart." His little arms flew around my neck and I hugged him tight, fighting back tears I didn't expect. I missed you, he whispered. I missed you too, I replied gently. As I stood up, I looked around one last time. Not out of pride. Not to rub it in. But to take in the moment. To see it fully. To feel it. I saw Jason watching me differently now. Not just with surprise but with a kind of respect. Like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. I saw my sister still frozen in place, her eyes darting between people, trying to figure out how to control the narrative again. But it was too late. I didn't gloat. I didn't argue. I didn't linger. I just smiled gently, nodded at a few familiar faces and walked out. Not in anger. Not in pain. But in peace. Because I had finally stopped chasing acceptance from people who were only comfortable when I was beneath them. And in that quiet walk back to my car I realized, I hadn't just shown up at a birthday party. I had stepped into my own power. And left with my head held high. Later that night when I got home I sat down on my couch, my mind replaying everything that had just unfolded. I had expected maybe a few awkward glances or murmurs, but I didn't expect this strange quietness that followed. It was the kind of silence that comes with an unspoken truth, the kind that makes you realize there's no turning back. As I scrolled through my phone I saw a message pop up from Jason. I hadn't expected to hear from him so soon. His words were simple but they carried weight. I'm sorry. I had no idea. I admire what you've built. I stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to feel. Part of me wanted to be angry, to fire back with something sharp. But the other part, what had been growing quietly inside me for the past few years, just felt calm. I didn't respond right away. What was there to say? Jason had been blindsided, but he hadn't been the one who had shut me out all these years. He didn't know what it had felt like to watch my sister walk away from me, to be excluded time and time again, all while she lived in her bubble of wealth and convenience. Still, his words held a certain respect. He had seen me now, not as just the sister of his wife but as a person in my own right. A person who had built something from nothing. Then a few days later I got a text from my sister. The message was long, filled with apologies. She apologized for the way she treated me, for the way she had belittled me for so long. She acknowledged the distance between us, how she had pushed me away, how she had let jealousy and pride guide her actions. I never realized how much I hurt you, she wrote. I'm sorry. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the screen for a long time. My finger hovered over the keyboard, the temptation to respond tugging at me. Part of me wanted to let her know how much she had broken me, how much pain I had carried in silence. Part of me wanted to shout, to demand that she understand how much her actions had hurt. But then I remembered something important. Some lessons are better learned through silence. I didn't respond. I just put my phone down and walked away. I needed the space. She needed the space. I had forgiven her. I had let go of the anger, the frustration, and the sadness that had built up over the years. But forgiveness didn't mean I was willing to open myself up to being hurt again. I wasn't ready to pick up where we left off, not without trust, not without real change. And somewhere in the quiet of that moment I realized something else. I didn't need an invitation to prove that I belonged. For so long I had tried to fit into spaces where I wasn't wanted. I had tried to get my sister's approval, to earn my place in her world. But now I understood, I had my own world. My own success. My own life. And I didn't need anyone to validate it. Not her. Not anyone. I forgave her in my heart, but I also promised myself that I would never let anyone make me feel small again. I would never shrink into the background just to fit in. I had come too far, worked too hard, and grown too strong to ever go back to that version of myself. The silence stretched between us and I felt peace settle inside me. Because I knew I was finally free, not just from her but from the need to seek her approval. I was free to stand on my own without looking over my shoulder. And that was enough.